All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Terza with the Parsons Entrepreneur Academy. Thank you all for joining us today for our second installment in a series called Behind the Creative. Here we invite successful and inspiring creative entrepreneurs to share their stories and the lessons they've learned along the way. For those of you joining us for the first time, the Parsons Entrepreneur Academy is a platform that empowers creative entrepreneurs like yourself to build sustainable businesses around your art. We will have 35 to 45 minutes of chat time before opening up for Q&A with the audience. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by Eric Veloso, a photographer by trade and current culture powerhouse, serving as a co-founder and creative director of Street Dreams Mag and its counterpart, creative agency SDVA. And on that note, please welcome today's guest, Eric. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
First and
absolutely.
foremost, have been a massive fan of everything Parsons and New School related. So super honored to be here, and thank you for reaching out. I'm excited to connect with the audience and drop a few gems, hopefully.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're thrilled to have you here. Thank you so much for wanting to be on this as well. So, to start off, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how you started in photography and in your line of work.
Yeah. First generation Canadian, born in Vancouver, raised in Vancouver, born in Calgary, to a family originally from Santiago, Chile, who immigrated to Canada in the late 70s, prior to my arrival on this earth. Just grew up in a very sort of like eclectic Latino environment. Super, super hyperactive, was always bouncing off the walls, wanting to do everything and anything that I could get my hands on. Kind of growing up in Vancouver is a very unique place where you grow up with like a lot of access to mountains and oceans. So there's like a lot of, outdoor activities that have been like, I want to say, integrated into my life for a long time. That including skateboarding, which was probably one of my first passions that sort of led me down the path to being very, very interested in subcultures as a whole. Growing up in Vancouver, to an immigrant family, was always based around this idea of hustle and understanding how to, get an inch and take a mile behind everything that you get. So it was always really, really, really inspired by, my mom being a single mom, hustling her way through school and making, leaps and bounds behind her career every step of the way, and sort of using that as, I think, the main inspiration for me to try to find my passions and really kind of make sure that I tapped into my potential in a manner that was very conducive to making something based around all the sacrifices that my family made to get here. So in and of itself, I think my first sort of foray into the love of photography was definitely through family photo albums. Was always looking through everything from photo albums to magazines to album art, CDs. And I think from a very early age, I was a visual learner right off the jump. So I was definitely the kid that was always like looking for the pictures in the book as opposed to actually sitting there and like trying to read all the text. So from a very early age, I think I was I gravitated towards like visual culture, I think in a very natural manner. So whether that was like being obsessed with television or my favorite TV shows and, films and things of that nature. Prior to the internet, like magazines were the first form of the internet in a lot of ways. So I was always like growing up collecting Thrasher magazines, Slam magazines, Source magazines, and Vogues, and cutting out all the pages of the magazines and putting them up on my walls and sort of like curating this sort of universe for myself that was really based around the inspiration that I found from all these different sort of cultural things that I think made me who I am. And then the last point to it, I think, being a Canadian and growing up a little bit far removed from a lot of the places that have access to a lot of opportunity. You grow up sort of observing the world in a lot of ways. So with us being, in Canada and specifically British Columbia, the province that I'm from, like we have a lot of that, like sort of like that UK sort of influence, and that was really, really inundated in a lot of our day-to-day lives, like whether that be like, checking BBC and seeing like the news feeds, or Downton Abbey and like seeing all these like, classical like UK shows. For me, I was always an observer of the places that I think I aspired to be inspired by. So for me, I was always looking up to places like the UK, New York City, Los Angeles, Japan, and probably Germany, Berlin, for like the design angle of things. So I think in and of itself, like being a Canadian kid, that sort of like allowed for me to become almost like a sponge of all these things that I was inspired by. So in and of itself, all of that sort of manifested itself through a lot of ups and downs to get me onto the path of photography. And that sort of, figured out my why in a lot of ways behind just finding that trade that sort of, I think, spoke to me and sort of allowed for me to get a lot of ideas that I had in my head out. And I think it's a really personal thing to be a photographer in a lot of ways, because I think sharing your perspective through the images that you create is something really personal just in and of itself. So going back to that idea of family photo albums and having like this very intimate sort of value behind it, I think as a photographer, I'm always trying to find like these little sort of like subtle moments behind life, and kind of really trying to articulate like the quietness, I think, of what it is that, day-to-day life really feels and sounds like. So sorry, not to get too long-winded, but I think that was sort of like the first foray into my love of photography was through family photo albums, magazines, and skateboarding, which was my first sort of wave of understanding to focus on things, to have actually a theme behind my photography.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing. That's a wonderful intro. So what was like the one kind of defining moment where you realized like, this is what I want to be doing? Photography is what I want to build my career around?
Yeah, it's definitely a learning curve for me. So backtracking a little touch, like all throughout high school, skateboarding, like I mentioned, was sort of like this first independent activity that really sort of started to build my personality in a lot of ways. So as you know, with skateboarding, like people who are out there who like love the sport and the art of it, it's one of these tasks that you can start off by yourself. Like, like you can be doing your tricks in the driveway, just skating up and down the block just to kind of get your bearings on a skateboard. And early on for me, that became like a very independent sort of pursuit for me, because for a long time, like I grew up as an only child prior to my mom having my siblings, which came like almost like 14 years down the line after I was born. So in a lot of ways, like I was always that kid that was around all the adults, bugging all the teenagers so I could hang out in the room and try to like, get access to the cool stuff that they were interacting with. So when skateboarding came into my life, that was the first thing that was just like, holy, like this is really for myself. And I really, really gravitated towards it. So all throughout elementary school into high school, skateboarding was like very, very omnipresent with me. That coupled with my love of hip hop was sort of like always this like sound clash of activity that was always happening through my headphones and in my spirit. And I think in a lot of the cultural things that I was interacting with. So in high school, one summer, I remember trying my first hand at like dropping into a skate bowl into an actual skate park. And the very first time I did it, I busted my ass and I sprained my ankle. So lo and behold, that was like the end of my skateboarding career, because I think at that point I understood that I didn't have the pain threshold to actually be an actual skateboarder. But lo and behold, after that happened, I sat down on a bench, and right beside me, there happened to be a Canon AE1 film camera. And it happened to be one of my friends who was with me at the skate park. And because I couldn't skate, like I started taking photos instantly in that moment. And that sort of became my first theme and sort of subject matter that sort of forged me onto the path of photography. In and of itself, like my journey after high school led me into wanting to go into the film industry. And that was coupled with the fact that my mom was an entertainment director at one of the major hotels out here in Vancouver. And she had like all these connections to Hollywood North, which was just like the booming new sort of wave that was happening with like all these film productions being shot in Vancouver. So she had like all these amazing plugs to, different studios, producers, and people who were coming through the city and just doing cool stuff in the film industry. So as soon as I started like getting hip to the credits of movies and started actually sitting there and reading the credit list and finding out like, what an executive producer is, or like, what a first AD does, or like what a director of photography actually is. That's when my like I want to say like a light bulb moment happened for me in my high school years. So after high school, I wanted to pursue a film industry profession, and with aspirations of becoming a director of photography. So in and of itself, I had like a few opportunities straight after high school that allowed me to apprentice for a couple of directors of photography to sort of like get my feet set in the film industry world. I want to say that I probably wasn't ready at that time, because I think in the moment, being in my early 20s, just getting out of my teens, I don't think I had the capacity to really be told what to do, or really, kind of sort of, I guess, be dictated in terms of how it is that I could, build this career path. So I left it behind, and I basically ended up just becoming a production assistant for different production companies here in the city for about 5 years after high school, into my early 20s, in my mid 20s. After that, sort of got a little bit jaded with the whole industry and just felt like, I kind of hit a wall. So lo and behold, I left everything behind and I just got a regular job at a retail distribution place, and was literally just doing like some regular 9-to-5 stuff before I sort of started catching that bug again. And, like I was thriving in the career that I had, built with just this regular 9-to-5, but I found myself sort of forcing myself to go in and do this job every day by like getting to my shift like 10 minutes beforehand and sitting in the car for 10 minutes and almost like having to hype myself up to go in and do this job. So in and of itself, I sort of hit that crossroads for myself where it was just like, okay, like there's going to be two ways that you're going to approach this. Like this is a crossroads for you as an individual. Like it's either you shut up and don't complain about this anymore and just go do this because it pays the bills and, it's a career path that could potentially grow and, you're exceeding in it and things of that nature. But the second half of it was just like, okay, it's either you shut up or you take a leap of faith and you actually go do something that feels scary, but maybe is more geared towards what it is that you're maybe destined to do. So lo and behold, that fork in the road came, and I basically left the job behind, took all my savings and ended up going back to school for photography. And this was in 2011. When I went back to Langara, which is a university out here in Vancouver, and I enrolled in a 3-year photo program. So from there, that was sort of like that full circle moment of me saying like, okay, put up or shut up, follow your path. If this is what it is that you want to do, then burn through all your savings, be broke, and see if this is going to be something that's going to really fulfill you in a manner that maybe other things weren't. So 2011 is when I went back to school for photography, and that sort of spiraled into the snowball effect of where we are today.
That's an incredible story. I love how things happen sometimes when you just have to like take a leap of faith and you're like, it's either going to work out or I don't try and I'll never know what the outcome could be of that, So what was kind of your first like big break? Like what was the first thing that you did that kind of, got to where you are now?
Yeah, I want to say like the first big break was starting Street Dreams. So lo and behold, in 2011, I go back to school for photography. At that time, this little social media app popped up on the radar called Instagram. And Instagram became not only, I think, my first foray into like actually engaging with social media. I think Twitter was probably my first. I want to backtrack. Tumblr into Twitter.
Oh, yes. I actually still use Tumblr.
Oh my God.
I don't talk about it, but I still use Tumblr.
It's still super poppin'. So whoever's out there, I'm pretty sure everybody who's listening understands that Tumblr is like still an amazing place for inspiration.
Totally.
There's definitely like all those blogs that you consistently visit on a daily basis and just scroll through and just like actually have like a little bit of Tumblr time every day.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those like apps that like is not used enough, but I'm like, it's really underrated. Like if you're following the right blogs, the right people, like it's a huge source of inspiration for sure.
Massive. So in and of itself, like that became inspiring, like, so Tumblr was like the place where I sort of started to sort of like dip my toes into interacting with people on the internet, and sort of like, either whether it be following somebody's blog or reposting people's work, or starting like an inspiration mood board kind of space for myself, just based around like the cool stuff that I would find on the internet. And I think that really spoke towards like the cultural things that I was interested in, sort of then led me into the path of Twitter. And Twitter was really cool when it first came out, because I remember the reason that I joined Twitter was because Erykah Badu is one of my favorite musicians, and I saw that she was on Twitter, and it blew my mind because I was just like, yo, like on Twitter, you can actually just follow these people outright and actually just listen to their thoughts, and maybe you could tweet at them and maybe one day they're going to engage with you. But it felt like this really sort of like personal, I want to say like filter that got removed in a lot of ways, because it felt like this direct link to like these amazing people that you're inspired by, and you can actually just follow along their journey in a very, very personal way. So then after Twitter, like Instagram pops up, and then I had an aha moment, because I'm back in school for photography, learning. And for me, going back to school, I want to sort of like contextualize it in the sense that I had all these ideas in my head of like visual stories that I wanted to create as a photographer. But for me, going back to school, it was more like understanding and learning the technical side of things. Like now I need to learn how to do X, Y, and Z so that I can bring these ideas that I have in my head out into the world. Sometimes when you go into programs like, and you meet people who are trying to learn like the ideation process, and like, not saying that you don't learn things through, these types of programs, but I think you as a creative maybe should have like a mission in mind sometimes, so that when you're actually, inundating yourself, or engaging yourself within an educational program of some sort, then at least you already have a context that you're already applying all the knowledge that you have into almost like a working mode that is instantly putting it into action, or at least giving you the ammunition so that you can come out and shoot for the stars in essence. So Instagram comes out. I'm in school for photography, and during the time that I'm doing my film program, my girlfriend Celine, girlfriend at the time, wife now, she had just moved to New York City during the time that I'm in school, and she works for a company called Aritzia, which is a fashion boutique based in Vancouver, but all over the place. So an amazing company. So she had gone to New York during these times to open up the first US stores like in the East Coast that they opened in New York City. So I'm in school, Instagram pops up. I'm starting to visit Celine in New York way more often. So I'm starting to get like this eye-opening experience of like going to New York for the first time as an adult, and really getting my mind blown in terms of like seeing how this really is like the center of the universe, and things really happen here in a manner that can really take it from like an idea into something that could actually become something. So I started using Instagram, and then during the early days, like what I started to understand is that as a photographer, I could use Instagram to become a working portfolio for myself, to share my work. But at the same time, it was a major networking tool where I could follow all these people from places that I wasn't necessarily in physically, but start to engage with each other based on our work. So that opened up like this huge sense of community, where it felt like it was almost like this digital renaissance that was happening, where a lot of the middle ground got cut out, and we were able to connect without like sort of any gatekeepers in the way to kind of tell you how to engage with one another. So going to New York, start catching this bug of what's happening in the city. And then on the New York side through Instagram, started noticing that there was all these, like crews of photographers that were linking up with one another, and just like almost like bombing the city streets with photography the same way that graffiti artists were doing in the 1970s, like meetups here and there, like, photographers just like shooting with each other. And it felt like it was like this sort of, deep level of competition, but at the same time, it felt like everyone was sort of uplifting themselves through the photography platforms. So, I started to like started getting deeper into the Instagram game, and started noticing that hashtags were sort of a deeper way now for people to sort of start engaging with community building on the platform. So you would see things like one of the first tags that stuck my attention was something called stride by. And basically stride by was just literally photos of people walking across buildings and in stride. So again, these subcultures were starting to be built there. I'm just like, holy cow, like now you can not only just like put a black and white photo hashtag on there, you can actually create a theme for photography, and people will start engaging with it if they really follow that sort of same, I guess, idea that you're putting out there into the internet. So lo and behold, just start searching through the internet and stumble upon a couple of hashtags that sparked my interest. And one of them happened to have a bunch of posts by a character from New York City named Steve Sweatpants, and it was a photographer from Brooklyn. So 16 by 9 was 16 by 9 vibes was a hashtag that he had put out, speaking about the crop of the photos that he puts out. So 16 by 9 being the crop. Lo and behold, during these times of Celine working at Aritzia, she happened to have a coworker who had a boyfriend named AJ Albano, who's a Filipino barber and vintage curator from Staten Island. And lo and behold, I connected with him when I went for a trip to New York City, and lo and behold, that he was following Steve Sweatpants as well. So in and of itself, like during my next trip to New York City during this time, I asked AJ to connect us through the internet for my next trip. And prior to that, I had started a Tumblr blog called Street Dreams, which was basically kind of like my own visual journal based around my own street photography while I was in the film program. So I went to New York City, had started this Tumblr called Street Dreams. Me and my co-founder, Mike, who are from Vancouver, he's a graphic designer by trade, and an art director. So we were always sort of like figuring out ways to work together with like photography and graphic design. We started a Tumblr that was like really dedicated to just like editorializing like a lot of the stuff that we were inspired by. So it was almost like an online magazine. So in and of itself, we were starting this practice. I meet Steve, head out to New York City, make a day of it, and we spent like 8 hours walking all over New York. Before heading back to Brooklyn, we were on the Williamsburg Bridge, and I basically just kicked him this idea. We're just like, hey man, like, I'm about to finish this photo program. I think, it'd be really cool to work on something together, because I think that, we could kind of add value to what it is that you're doing here and what we're doing in Vancouver. If we combine our efforts, maybe there's a way for us to basically take this idea called Street Dreams and put out like a digital publication of some sort. So that was the first idea, sort of like the ideation of Street Dreams. Lo and behold, through a bunch of serendipitous actions, we took this originally digital idea and found a way to bring it to print. So the idea with Street Dreams was basically to take this amazing amount of photography that was being curated and shared on the Instagram platform and bringing it back to real life by actually creating a magazine from it. So we sort of like reverse engineered the platform in a lot of ways, and basically, gave ourselves the chance to create a publication, because lo and behold, for me, like, I'm doing my photo programs, and you finally get to that stage where you present your portfolio to like industry professionals, and you obviously get shot down a lot in these conversations, because you let people know what you want to do, and then they basically sort of like, like, I want to say like dim your flame a little bit by letting you know, hey, yeah, that's cool. You could try to reach for the stars, but maybe that's not what's going to happen for you. So behind all of that, just like with that punk rock mentality that we've always had with ourselves, sort of like always trying to take the road with most resistance, we decided that if we can't get into other people's publications, then at least maybe we can try to start our own and really make it an equal playing field, where it's about nothing else except the work, and having the community of photographers really just use it as a platform to share their work to a bigger audience. So in and of itself, the idea was just to take community-based submissions through a hashtag, through the Instagram page, and basically take this amazing digital work and bring it into real life through a print publication and mixed media art shows that we would travel around the US for every edition of the magazine to basically bring our blank canvas, which is Street Dreams, and allow the community of photographers to sort of bring their paints and shine their light through the Street Dreams platform.
That is incredible. And I love that it's still going. Like, Street Dreams is, it's an ever-growing hashtag, and it's an ever-growing platform. And I love that you said digital renaissance in the beginning when you were talking about Instagram, because in a way, through Street Dreams, you guys also created a digital renaissance, and, kind of like creating that hashtag. Hashtags can build community, can build a conversation. So I want to ask, why is community building important to you, and how has that affected your creative journey?
Community is really everything. Going back to the idea of, coming from, immigrants to a new country, I think a lot of that is rooted in how it is that we survive through a lot of these things. So, community for us has always been at the cusp of what started, or at least was the genesis of the idea, because what it was for us, it was just like, again, this idea of, again, that gatekeeper mentality that always sort of like keeps you in a box in a lot of ways, is just really trying to dim your shine in a lot of ways by letting you know that if I have the keys to something here, I'm not going to give up these keys, because I don't want to lose my place within the space that I'm holding. So in a lot of ways, going back to the idea of a digital renaissance, like, social media can be looked at as like a very superficial tool. But in a lot of ways, I think Street Dreams sort of like looked at it as a conduit to understanding how we can directly connect with, people on a cultural level. And I think that goes back to everything that we've always been inspired by. Like, we're heavily invested in, like, paying respect and homage to everything that's been done before us. We're not coming out here trying to ever think that we invented the idea of magazines, but I think we just took like, the publishing platform and like threw rims on it, and we're just like, we just want to kind of spruce it up a little bit and maybe drive it around the block a couple times and just show you what we can do with it. If we kind of just have the keys to basically kind of like drive our own vehicle in a lot of ways. So the community aspect of it was everything, because what drew me into the people that ended up becoming my, partners through this entire experience was community in and of itself. Like, coming from a place like Vancouver, it's a very small city in a lot of ways. So sometimes the opportunity to connect with people out here is a little bit more limited, because there's not like these massive pockets of different subcultures that are sort of happening at the city at one time. It feels like it's almost like one temperature at all times, and you sort of like have to move at the pace of whoever's maybe like controlling the speed of how the culture moves out here in the city. So in and of itself, like, me and my group of friends, we're always sort of like very to ourselves. And again, growing up being obsessed with New York City, we knew that the only way that we could bring this to life was by connecting with the bigger pond, like understanding that if we could find the right people in a very natural way, which is how it is that we all found one another, it really sort of just became this very, I want to say, organic, step-by-step approach to, again, just sort of like retrofitting what was happening and understanding that if we could just like completely take all of the bells and whistles that you usually have to jump through to get into a publication, and just say, like, whether you've been shooting for 20 minutes, 20 days, or 20 years, you can share the same pages together because it's about the work. That's what I think sort of started to make Street Dreams a culture of its own in a lot of ways. So then it became almost like this badge of honor that photographers were looking at, and not only growing with us in our story as entrepreneurs, as people who were just like doing this on the fly and understanding that every door that opened was based around like an action of positivity that really, really sort of allowed for, the opportunities to sort of like jump on the radar. I think that really rang true in a lot of people's spirits, because I think the Street Dream story is all of our stories in a lot of ways. And, this is born out of a lot of misses. This is born out of like a lot of dark days of all of us individually going through a ton of mental health battles and, driving yourself crazy at some points by believing in something that maybe is not happening for a long time. But in and of itself, I think that exercise and the idea of getting through these sort of like super, super low points to understand how to bounce up and sort of overcome these things is where Street Dreams really became like a saving grace for us in a lot of ways. And I think that reflected the community's sort of like position and their mission in terms of what everyone was trying to experience. And we really just positioned ourselves in the center by saying, like, again, Street Dreams is a blank canvas. Bring all your paints to the table and like paint with broad strokes, and we can create beautiful art together. And in and of itself, like, the idea with it was every time we release a magazine edition, we were going to feature 6 photographers. And even the approach with that was just like, out of the 6 photographers, there's always going to be 3 males and 3 females. Like, we always knew, like, right off the jump, we're all mama's boys. Like, we come from very strong families with amazing, amazing female powers that have brought us to where we are. So like, we always knew that it was never going to be like this dude show where even like, the visual space sometimes, specifically in photography, it gets a little bit masculine, like, dominated. So we knew like through the entire platform that anytime we put out a magazine, that we're going to equally share the spotlight between males and females, so that we're showing the power and the balance of giving the creators the space to sort of like be who they are and just like champion the art that they create. Behind that, we basically said, like, every edition that we put out, we're going to go to a new city and feature the photographers from that city to make up the editions of the magazines. So in and of itself, we have the digital community that's built off Instagram. That goes into the physical publication that then brings IRL activities into gallery events and mixed media art shows through different places. So that was really like the vehicle, in a lot of ways. We make the analogy of saying, like, at times maybe Vancouver is the vehicle for Street Dreams, but New York is the gas that makes like the entire ship run. So we're very, very humbled to be able to have a East Coast and West Coast family that is a little bit unorthodox, but it works because I think we're all invested into it because we're trying to make good on all the hard work that was done before us to get us here.
Definitely. And I love that, like, the East Coast and West Coast alone individually are such huge powerhouses of just creativity. And, the street, the culture, everything is different, like in Vancouver versus like in Toronto, or in New York versus LA. The film industry is different, photography is different, and like different styles. And I love everything that you said. And I have to go back, and you said something about startups and how there are all the darker days, like when you're going through mental health stuff and when things don't seem to be picking up. A lot of startups go through that, and I'm sure that you guys had your fair share of difficulty with growing Street Dreams. But what are some kind of tips you would have for people who are looking to whether it's create a community or build a platform online or start a business? What are some tips or things you would tell them that they should know beforehand?
Yeah, what I think is something that has been very, I think, indicative of what it is that we've done with Street Dreams and what we've all even done in our individual careers, is that real life connections matter at the end of the day. And I think that as much as like these connections happen online and maybe sometimes the front facing tools of how it is that we operate in the 21st century are based around like screens and following people on social media platforms and things of that nature. But I think what's important is that if we're trying to build sustainable businesses, like I think the real life factor really has to be present right from the jump in a lot of ways, because I can't tell you how many times, like I think the best part of what it is that we do is like opening up a gallery show for a different city and having, one of the photographers come through with their parents and showing them a picture on the wall. That in and of itself, I think, becomes something that really creates these deep, valuable bonds behind the community that allow you to engage in a space that, obviously we're going through a pandemic and we can't get as close as we want right now. But I think that the real life opportunities of standing in a room with somebody and showing a physical piece of work on the wall and having a magazine that you can flip through and sort of, championing the aspect of it where even if, for example, like your picture's not on the wall, but your friend's picture's on the wall, like that makes you hype because it's like we all made it and like, we're all here at the show and we can celebrate these moments together. I think having a physical component to a lot of the stuff that we do as artists is very, very important. And I know that that doesn't make sense maybe for somebody who is like a social media manager or something like that. But if there's any way to sort of like add an experiential side to any of the ideas that we're trying to create as creative entrepreneurs, I think that that's where the legwork is really done in terms of the face-to-face interaction, the real life memories that are made through, these spaces that pop up for a weekend and aren't there anymore. And it really becomes a memory because it's not accessible to you at all times. I think that's also a really good point too. It's just like less is more in a lot of ways. And I know that's easier said than done, but we always sort of took that approach where we knew that we could build the foundation for our business by, giving people just enough so that they stay intrigued and want to participate in what it is that we're doing for the community, but also leaving space in between so that you don't play yourself out or, you're too much out there, because then it becomes something that maybe could become, mundane for some people to follow along with. So for us with Street Dreams, like it was really like these serendipitous moments that I think were based out of the idea of like the universe, like sort of speaking to us in a manner that maybe we weren't listening to in a lot of ways. And not to get too hippie with it, but I think intention is really everything when it comes down to your creative endeavors. And I think that that's the test, like if you're willing to stick through the highs and the lows. And, I've struggled with mental health my whole life as well, with like depression and things of that nature. So, photography became like a way for me to focus my mind in a manner that allowed me to get out of bed and do things that were for myself. And then Street Dreams really became like a context to allow for me to create like a whole new career path as a creative, by now almost becoming like, almost by default becoming like a Swiss Army knife of creativity, because we have our hands in so many pots and are really, really, really blessed to have, started off as a print publication and just like naturally curtailed ourselves into doing creative agency work for a lot of amazing companies that we've been inspired by for a long time.
That's fantastic. I love what you said about, a lot of the times now we're on our phone, like we've kind of lost a lot of the other senses that we have. Like we lose,
Sure.
Like the tangibility of things. Like I think experience is so important, and sometimes like digitally, like it's not always there. And I love what you said about, why you guys do galleries, because it's a wonderful feeling. I think sometimes when people have startups, they think about like the longer term, like how like the multitudes of people that they can affect, but really
Totally.
It's that one kid who goes into, who uses your product, uses your service, and is like, this has changed my life, and
Sure.
it's like that kid who goes into gallery and is like, hey, mom and dad, like this is the thing that I created, and it's up on this wall for, hundreds of people to come and see. And, I think a lot of the time is like we do this for people, and our art ripples in so many ways that we might not understand. And I feel like a lot of
Totally.
this always comes back to community and to connections.
Yeah, 100%. And it kind of lo and behold, what sort of was the, I want to say, spillover effect for us, like one little tidbit of how I think Street Dreams became super popular, and going back to that idea of doing like these real life activations. So we released the magazine on a limited basis. So there's only 1,000 copies of every edition that we put out. That's sort of tactful in the sense of it being like this very collectible sort of print publication that's out there, because that's what I've always loved as a collector of culture, is like the one of ones, you know, like these things that I only know
Totally.
that there's 10 out there, you know what I'm saying? So we knew that respect factor to like the print publication was something that we wanted to do, so that again, it didn't fizzle out in the sense of it being, you know, oversaturating the market. So what ended up happening for us is that we print the first edition of Street Dreams. Lo and behold, we print 150 magazines. The whole goal is just like, yo, we're gonna set up an Instagram page, and if we can have people who are featured in the magazine that have like a certain amount of follower accounts, then if we can get like 5% of like the total number of followers, then maybe we could sell like 100 magazines. So that was like the first foray of sort of like the print sort of model. So we released issue 1, gangbusters, just flies off the shelves, like in an aha moment where we're just like, our jaws drop. We're like, holy, like we didn't think it was gonna move like this. So we didn't do a gallery show for issue 1 because obviously the project had just launched. Issue 2, we did our first gallery event with a very, very small show here in Vancouver. And that sort of set up the template for us to create like a template for our gallery events that we could take to different cities. So then for issue 3, we actually, we linked up with Jeff Staple and Read Space. So for anybody that's out there that's aware of Jeff Staple, amazing creative, released the Pigeon Dunks. He's sort of like this multifaceted creative that really understood like this sort of multi-dimensional approach to a brand where you can have a storefront and a design agency and like, you know, collaborations with, you know, like Nike and things of that nature, and sort of showed that you can take these ideas and bring it into the cultural space. So between issue 2 and 3, I remember having a conversation with Mike and Steve, and we're on the phone, and we're just like, okay, we're trying to get this magazine into a store. What would be the first store that we would try to get it into? And almost verbatim on the call, we all said Read Space, like right at the same time. So Read Space was Jeff's shop in the LES in New York City, and it was always like this cultural hub where you know, Steve would hang out there for hours at a time, and it was always that place where you could just kick it and nobody was kicking you out. Like you could sit there and like look at the magazines and talk to the staff, and it never felt too pretentious for anybody. So we're getting ready to do issue 3. We reach out to Jeff and his team, including Anna Sian, who was their marketing director at the time. And we basically asked them if they would take some magazines on consignment. So they took issue 2 on consignment. And then between now and then that we had the plug, we're just like, hey, we want to do our first New York gallery show. Do you think maybe there's a way for us to get you guys to become guest editors for the magazine? And then we can do an event with y'all at Read Space potentially. So they're super down with the idea. Anna and Jeff end up curating like a grid based off the Staple Pigeon hashtag in the magazine. So then we start preparing for this gallery event for issue 3 that we're going to do at Read Space in New York. So basically, Read Space is basically, it's not a huge retail space. So it probably fits, I want to say like 70 people comfortably. They always do events there, but you know, it's obviously like to capacity and things of that nature. So we're there for doing issue 3. Me and Mike land in New York City. We're setting up the gallery show. And prior to the doors opening, and for all our gallery events, we're always running at the last minute to make sure that we get everything up on the wall and make sure that everything's ready to see on the walls. So literally the clock's winding down. Doors are about to open. I hadn't had a chance to look outside or anything, putting up the last print. And then I remember getting tapped on the shoulder by Mike, and Mike's like, yo, you got to go check outside right now. And I remember vivid as day, like I put the last print up, opened the door and look outside, and there were 600 people on the streets, like waiting to get into the Street Dream show. So it was like my heart dropped. I was just like, yo, like we still to this day come into it with like having very low expectations because we want to not play ourselves out or overhype it so that we can really experience like these, you know, very beautiful moments without any context for ourselves. So 600 people are on the streets, the doors open, 15 minutes into the event gets shut down because the NYPD came and was just like, yo, what's going on here? There's way too many people in here. Like, tell us what's happening. So that sort of put us on the map because there was only 2 times in history that the Read Space ever got shut down. One was when Jeff dropped the Pigeon Dunks, which was like the monumental collaboration in Nike history. And then the second one was Street Dreams issue 3. So as soon as that happened, like the floodgates sort of opened because we solidified the idea in New York City. And it became sort of like this reverberating moment where we actually like shook the ground for a second, and it became like this blip on the radar that ended up sort of like catching people's attention. Going back to like the idea of experience, lo and behold, after that, like we got invited basically between issue 4 and 5, we get invited to do an Apple talk at the Apple store in Soho. So that's when Apple first started doing their programming, like, you know, Apple Today and like all these like different workshops that they're doing for the community. So they invite Street Dreams to do an Apple talk. And lo and behold, in that Apple talk, there's 300 people that came to the Apple store to watch us talk about the Street Dream story. Lo and behold, there was a New York Times writer in the audience at the Apple store. So us doing that talk, putting ourselves out there for the first time, not knowing what to say and just shooting from the hip and just like wearing our heart on our sleeves, us doing that real life activity then led us into getting a New York Times article written about us in 2015. And that really solidified the project on a scale that just we didn't even understand that we'd take it to. And then from there, that naturally just opened up the opportunity for the notoriety of the platform to be really, really solidified in a very sort of like cultural, institutional space. And then that's when sort of like the brands came calling to us in terms of seeing what we were doing with the community, looking at our audience, and then asking us to basically create narratives for different campaigns and brand partners that were really looking for an authentic voice to tell the stories.
That's incredible. I could not imagine 600 people lining up for anything. Like, I don't even think people line up for Supreme anymore. That, like, I don't think 600 people have lined up for Supreme. I'll tell you that much.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
It's been a minute.
That's insane. I love that so much. And so, how do you continue to kind of grow Street Dreams or grow your community? And how do you know when it's time to pivot or to try something new?
I think, I mean, going down to it, and as we know as entrepreneurs, like we wear 40 hats at once, you know what I mean? Like we fire on all cylinders at all times. We burn, you know, the candle at both ends, and we really sort of like put these blinders on for us so that we could, you know, start looking at how we can build resumes and like keep the ship going. So a lot of the work for us was, you know, the first like 3 years of the publication were really heavily focused on invested in developing the community for ourselves. With that sort of snowballed into the idea of having, you know, brand partners and different sort of collaborators come to the table to want to engage with our community and then ask for us to tell their stories. Lo and behold, through the entire process, we always still kept the community at the forefront, because now when we're getting work with, like, you know, Honda, for example, like hiring us to do a campaign for like the 2016 Civic, what we did for that campaign was bring it back to the community. So we basically did a series of photo walks in different parts of the US and brought the cars onto the streets and had people come out and shoot the cars with us, like side by side with the Street Dreams team. From there, we took all the content that was sourced through that crowdsourcing initiative and created a catalog that was distributed at all the Honda dealerships in North America. So as we started getting into this opportunity of now getting hired to do work for companies or like getting the opportunity to collaborate with people, we were always very cognizant of saying, all right, if we're going to work with Honda, then we're going to give the opportunity for whoever comes out and engages with us and has been following us to work with Honda as well, by potentially getting a credit in this little magazine that becomes, you know, a portfolio, you know, kind of, I want to say basically a credit for your portfolio. So in and of itself, like everything that we've retrofitted from Street Dreams has always been around the idea of just like organically moving into a space where it made sense for us to be and not overstepping our bounds by either doing stuff that's out of character for us, but really sort of like curating our presence in almost like a gallery kind of format. You know, like we want to make sure that our voice is very sort of conducive to understanding that we're trying to drive forward creativity and bridge the past and the present. But at the same time, knowing that opportunity that we get would always trickle down the pipeline to whoever supports us in a lot of ways. So when it comes to that, like when we built our team that now, you know, stretches from Vancouver to New York and soon in 2022 to Tokyo, like everybody that we met that now works with us and is part of our team has been met through this process. So in and of itself, it just started off by people who were really down with the idea, who now, you know, work with us full time so that we can, you know, activate everything that we have on our plate and also move in a manner that just continuously just keeps bringing opportunities to the table. So in and of itself, I think that the important part behind it is just like never, I think, creating a cadence for your business and your focus of what it is that you're putting out into the world and trying to sort of stay within like the boundaries so that it never, I guess, like not juxtaposes, but like, how do you say, there's the word that I'm looking for. Anyways, so it doesn't counteract like the mission at the end of the day. So everything that we did was really based around like, okay, we're going to start a publication. The audience is there. Whatever comes from here, we're going to take it and really mold it into the manner that is conducive to the original idea and using that to be the vehicle for that to grow and elevate. So from the publication, to the digital community, to the agency, to the new endeavors that we have going on into the whole crypto space and the NFT meta universe, with the next foray of like creative and artistic enabling for the community. It's been really like this organic sort of stage where we get into the rooms with these people that have interest in what it is that we do, and we always try to present something that is an ecosystem in and of itself. And I think that's what's really important in 2021, is that ideas are ecosystems. You as a creative are a commodity. You may not have $1 million, but you as yourself can be the $1 million idea, and like, if you retrofit yourself to be like super diverse behind your skill set and bring 100% of effort to the table at all times, you yourself become that asset that can be invested into things. And that's what I think of Street Dreams. It's like, we didn't have no money for any of this stuff. Like the first 3 years of this, like I was sleeping on the couch in Brooklyn, on the floor beside Steve, as we sort of like burned through, all the money that we had so that we grow the idea into something that actually could sustain us. But yeah, I think it's just, ideas are ecosystems. We as creatives are ecosystems, and that in and of itself, I think, can be a really cool approach for how it is that you engage with people and invest yourself into ideas that will, be reciprocal in a lot of ways for you.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. I love everything that you said, especially, I think your growth over the past 6 years is such an inspiring story for entrepreneurs. But I love so much more that you share, the realities of being an entrepreneur, of a startup, and how it is not all that it seems. Like now you have a crazy following, crazy community, but there were years where that wasn't the case. And, it was hard. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs need to realize that, like, there are years where you're underground, where your roots are growing.
Yeah.
And then there are the years where you bloom and you blossom. And so I want to ask you, what motivates you or interests you to keep going, and how do you avoid burnout?
You know what? I think for the pandemic really taught me how to find balance. Not for nothing.
Interesting.
It was again, going back to that idea of just like being in entrepreneur mode. Like when you start learning about these things, you obviously know that like anywhere from like 5 to 10 years to start up for any idea in order to like build a foundation that's solid enough to actually have the legs to sort of be something that can be sustainable in a lot of ways. So even with as much success as we've had, we really feel like we're now finally at the stage where we have the foundation set and we have the pieces in our hands that can now be maneuvered in the manner that really builds a solid business for every aspect of what it is that Street Dreams represents. So for me, when the pandemic hit, that's when like all the adrenaline dropped, and I realized that I had the weight of the world on my shoulders, and it really, really crumbled me in a lot of ways. And I try to look at it as an optimist, and maybe that's just my Canadian nature, to try to look at like the positive behind it. But I really look at the 2020 year as like this very, very crucial time to hit reset in a lot of ways and start understanding what really needed to be paid attention to. So for me personally, like it got to that stage where, we felt like we've been doing Street Dreams for 5-6 years. Everything stops. You're cut off from the other side of the equation, where, we're seeing each other anywhere from like 5 to 8 times per year in different locations, like whether we're going to New York or the New York team's coming to Vancouver, or we're doing events everywhere. So now you have like this, this lifeline that's cut off in a lot of ways. So it definitely put like our relationships in a whirlwind. But I think we came out of it in a better way, because I think what this taught us, and me specifically speaking about my own journey, is that I need to be super, super balanced in what it is that I'm doing in my life. So to answer your question, I think it's just all about understanding how to just create the ebbs and flows of, these little pockets of attention that we can sort of like put into the background and have ready to dedicate to the things that do need to have attention paid to it. So for me, it's just really, really important now to find like a really balanced work-life sort of regimen for myself, and understanding that I have younger siblings that look up to me, tending to my life as a married man now, and like trying to build a home and do the mortgage and all that stuff. So I'm really, really thankful. As obviously a lot of people had like some very, very tumultuous experiences over the last year, but I think if there's anything that we can take for ourselves, is maybe that peace of mind that we got for a few minutes when, there wasn't anything to do. So I think that as we move into the next stage of evolution for everything that we do with ourselves as individuals, and, kind of going back into the belly of the beast as we sort of get to the other side of what's been happening recently, I'm really, really trying to stay firm on understanding that I'm trying to take a lot of the sensibilities that I gained over the pandemic year to slow down, celebrate the stuff that we've done, and understand that you can move double time, but sometimes, half time is just as impactful, so that you can actually sit there and sort of like give yourselves the flowers you deserve when you've done something that maybe deserves a pat on the back, but is so quick because you're already moving on to the next task, So don't forget to give yourself a pat on the back for everything you're doing, because it's a lot.
Definitely. And I think as creatives, a lot of the time we are our biggest critics, because sometimes it feels like we're the only ones cheering ourselves on.
Yeah.
And, sometimes it's just like we have to celebrate all the small wins, and all the big wins. I feel like everything is an accomplishment, especially in the entrepreneurial journey. It's like things are just coming so quickly, right? And,
Totally.
You have to kind of just enjoy the process as much as you can.
And be present and be super present through it.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that so much. So I want to ask some more personal questions kind of pertaining to what we just talked about, but
yeah,
what are, in terms of slowing down, like you'd mentioned, what are some of the things that help you slow down, and what are the things, outside of your creative projects that, bring you joy?
Yeah. It's the simple things. When it goes back to me as a photographer, like I'm always obsessed with like finding the moment in between the moments. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody out there, but it's kind of like the little pockets of pause that happen in between, like, somebody adjusting themselves in the mirror, or, like taking a deep breath before like they cross like a street. Like I'm trying to put myself in the space where I have like creative ADD, so my mind runs at crazy paces at all times. So for me, photography has always been that space for me to really understand that once I was able to like focus on something, that sort of slowed down my thought process. So it allowed me to sort of like be more present in the experience of things that were happening. But yeah, I think it's just like really trying to be more aware and more present in the idea of just sitting in silence, like a lot of the time, some of us are addicted to the idea of always having something to do. And, there's those times when you don't have anything to do. And sometimes you feel like you're about to just like lose your mind because you're kind of just like pacing around in circles, or you don't know what to do with yourself. But I'm trying to take stock in the idea of being quiet with myself a little bit more. And also using that as like a place to sort of listen to myself a little bit deeper, so that I can become a better listener for the people in my life that maybe need me to be around for them in a manner that doesn't have me running at 100 miles a minute and just like spewing words endlessly. So yeah, it's just like the simple things, just spending time with family now is just taking on a whole new, a whole new meaning for me after what it is that we've gone through for this year. Because I think, sometimes we move in autopilot and feel like all these things are happening in real time, sort of behind the scenes. And it depends on like what screen you want to click into. If we're making an analogy of real life, and you have all these multiple tabs open at all times. But I guess like my reality, my reality state is like trying to keep less tabs open and maybe focusing on one screen at a time, as opposed to feeling like I have to, be accessible to everybody at all times, because I need my space as well. And, I'm a very solitary person almost by default, and to a fault, where sometimes I may become like super distant. But I think that's just because I need my space to understand how to be better for myself, because it makes me better for the people around me at the end of the day.
Definitely. I think everyone needs space. Everyone should be setting boundaries. I think space and silence are really important. And when you're in those like silent moments, is that when you're kind of having your creative breakthroughs, or when, or where rather, do you find inspiration for all your, whether that's for Sweet Dreams, or whether that's just your own personal creative endeavors? Like, where do you find inspiration?
For sure. What's been really cool about Street Dreams as well, just like a place note, is that like Street Dreams is sort of like we almost equate it to a basketball team, or like Wu-Tang, where it's like the crew, and it's opened up the opportunity for us to, land on radars. But what's been really amazing about our team and like the way that our ecosystem runs is that we've all still remained autonomous as individuals in our own creative pursuits. So we've never been pigeonholed by saying that everything has to be street dreams. Like, it's one of these things where, you know, Mike and Steve have their own career paths and, like, you know, things that they collaborate on that are aside from street dream, but 9 times out of 10, it always comes back to the source of what it is that we do. So we've been able to sort of carve these individual paths within street dreams, that being sort of like the door opener, and, you know, Eric Veloso becoming, you know, a photographer in his own right and following a path that's very conducive to me as an individual. Same thing down the line for everybody. So I think what's really cool about the way that we've built our business is that it's never going to pigeonhole you from pursuing what you want to do. And even though there might be some friction, or maybe there's some times that we're going to butt heads and maybe not agree on things, we understand that if you got to go do something out there that's only just about yourself, then as long as, you know, there's a segment of that you can bring back to the street dreams idea, then it really benefits all of us to be able to have that space to grow as individuals. So I think, you know, inspiration definitely comes from me, from my peers. You know, seeing the people around me achieving things that maybe were unimaginable in some way, shape, or form is awesome. And sort of being in this peer group and being looked at as equals with a lot of people that we were inspired by for a long time is, like, really, really motivating. You know, in a lot of ways, we're still, like, super obsessed with, like, culture. You know, like, I read a ton of books. I'm always looking at photo books. I'm always looking at the internet for inspiration. I'm always watching my favorite films. I'm trying to meditate now and try to find the time so that I can, like, actually just, like, sit down and just, like, focus on my breathing and things of that nature. But we're super, super obsessed with culture. So it's one of these things that I think is just very inherent to us, to always kind of be out there sourcing inspiration for ourselves, because, you know, we come from a time where it wasn't necessarily cool to copy. It was about you looking at something that inspired you and then making that your own through the attempt of reinterpreting that through the lens that you would make come to life. So with street dreams in and of itself, and us as individuals, like, I think we're our biggest sort of mentors, and our biggest peers. Biggest motivation comes from our peers, because, you know, we're sort of always doing something that's going to up the game in a lot of ways. And I think it's really important to find people in your life that motivates you to be better. And especially in the creative world, like, you know, there's a ton of stuff that you can do as an individual, but, you know, there's a lot of, I think, support and a lot of, I want to say, amplification that comes from the right people in your life that, you know, challenge you to be something different, you know. And I think that's the biggest gift that we've given ourselves. So we inspire ourselves all the time. And I think the biggest inspiration is just seeing that, you know, we could really make a dent in the world by just opening this up to being like a selfless platform, so that people can just shine. And, you know, that inspiration just keeps sort of like recycling itself into us being, you know, better at it is at what we do. And also just upping the game every step of the way, because I think, you know, that's where it really comes from. Family and your peers, I think, are our biggest inspiration source at this point.
I love that. And I love how you talk about them as support, and how, you know, like, it takes a village, right? And sometimes that village consists of your friends, of your family, of your peers, your coworkers. So my question is, do you have a mentor? And if so, you know, how did that come about, and how important is it to you to have a mentor?
Yeah. You know, I'm gonna say my mama is my biggest mentor. Definitely.
I love that.
She allowed me to be who I am, and allowed me to mess up and, you know, make mistakes, so that I could find my path to happiness. So first things first, like family. But in terms of like outright mentors, I definitely want to give a shout out to my man Mark Brand, who's an amazing entrepreneur and philanthropist from Vancouver, who uses food as his vessel to sort of like make a mark and impact in the world through his foundation that he's created called a Better Life Foundation. So Mark was the first person that I sat down with when we started the Street Dreams project, and he gave us our first gallery event. So in and of itself, like, staying connected to somebody like Mark and seeing what he's been able to do in his career, and how he's taken like his idea of using food as a vehicle to, you know, change neighborhoods and like gain this accessibility for people to understand how to nourish themselves in every manner, really, really inspired me by just the way that he sort of like approaches the way that he develops his business endeavors. so in and of itself, like that definitely stands out as Mark being like one of the first people that took us under his wing and gave me a shot to sit down and show him what it is that we were doing. Definitely shout outs to Mama, but also ourselves again, like it's really cool being able to be in a place where we're all sort of like mid-career in a lot of ways. So, we sort of mentor each other in the manner where, I look to Mike for inspiration and for the things that I need to sort of like be checked on or maybe validated in a lot of ways. And the same thing with Steve as well. Like it's been, a process of us being competitive in a lot of ways, but the competition between us and how he makes me be better by just setting an example of how it is that we should move, then I think that that's very cohesive to us, like sort of mentoring each other through making and limiting our mistakes by, being present for one another again and understanding that it's a fluid approach to what our creativity is. And we don't necessarily want to be held into a box, but we also don't want to miss our marks when we should be doing things that need to be done. So it's been really amazing to see like us all grow into different roles, like starting as a photographer, now moving into creative direction, into like direction in general, has really allowed for us to sort of keep adding, I want to say, tools to our toolbox. And, some of us are better with a screwdriver than others, so it's like, it's I think having that aspect around you that challenges you and allows you to be better is super important to the idea of trying to make something out of nothing.
Definitely. I think it's so important as well to have people that you trust around you who can hold you accountable because they're also believing and chasing the same dreams that you are, and I think
Sure.
That's why community is so important. That's why mentorship, people around you, your peers are so important. We are
Totally.
almost out of time for this segment, but I did have one more question for you before we move on to the Q&As. This is a question that I end off all of our kind of chats on because I just love it. But what are you looking forward to doing next?
Wow. So much.
I know.
That's a really, really great question because it could go in so many different different manners. You know what? I think what we equate it to now is that over the last 5-6 years of what it is that we've done with the project, including our individual careers, we really feel like we have the foundation set to really start making some impactful moves that allow for us to have the multiple different touch points of what makes Street Dreams like sort of like this multi-layered universe. So in and of itself, like I'm looking forward to getting back to reality in a lot of ways so that we can reconnect with people in the manner that's conducive to us, like pushing forward the needle collectively. At the same time, I'm really excited to, pursue my own individual goals as a individual, as a person in and of myself, like, doing my first gallery event or, directing my first short film. Like there's these very personal things that as we've sort of developed this skill set for ourselves have just allowed for us to even have that thought pop up on the radar to actually move in that direction is really, really special for us. So I think what's really exciting is just seeing how everyone is going to keep growing in their roles, in their careers. And, bringing the community along for the ride with us is really important. And once we can get back to, hitting the road and doing these shows in different places. And we ended off 2019 with our first gallery event in Tokyo, which was like the top of the mountain for me. And we had plans, of the first time to be there and to be there with our own brand was just like another level. So, getting back to the magazine production is something that's really, really important to me. So yeah, getting back to releasing magazines, interacting with people in gallery spaces, and keep adding to the layers of what makes Street Dreams special is really important for us. So we're always working on this. And I think, we always have this thought that we're always in beta mode. So it's really exciting just to keep investing into our platforms, whether that be Street Dreams Radio or our web space or putting out the publication. It's exciting to get back on track and have a renewed sense of purpose as we move into this other side of, reality.
I love that. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. I cannot wait to see what you guys get up to. And hopefully I'll be able to join one of your events sometime. You need to do one in Toronto.
Oh man, we got to be back. The sick, we got too much love for the sick. So we're definitely
totally.
Yeah, can't wait.
Amazing. All right. So we're going to move on to the Q&A portion. So For
Okay.
everyone watching, just drop all your questions into the chat and we will get to them. We have a couple already. Let me scroll up to see if
Awesome.
we have missed anything. All right. So the first question, now that your day job is about being creative, how do you balance the demands of your business, which can be draining, while remaining excited and engaged in the creative work?
Amazing question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even though we do a lot of creative things, I think it's important for us to still be fans of other things and still sort of like put our guard down so that we can be out there and be like, I want to say surprised, or also like experiencing these things that really inspire us to the highest degree without feeling too jaded behind either comparing that to our own work, or maybe just like, as we have so much access to information, just already maybe like putting it to the side because maybe we've seen it before, or maybe it doesn't impact us in the manner that is conducive to how it is that really like resonates in our systems. But I think it's just looking at different endeavors, whether that be the artists that you love, whether that be the films that you love, whether that be the directors of certain movies and things of that nature. I think being a fan of all of this amazing influx of creativity that's happening on every level, whether that be super established people to, a person that's just on the come up. I think it's really, really engaging to still be engaged with other people's work. And that in and of itself really makes me hyped to get up and take a better photo, to come out and put a better magazine because, I picked up a Vogue and was just like, yeah, that's how you do it. I think looking at everything as an inspiration, but also having the competition angle into it is just like finding that perfect balance of saying, not to get too jaded or not to get too critical of things, I think allows for us to keep our guard down and, allow for us to be inspired by these things that maybe are out of our wheelhouse or are similar to what it is that we're doing, but we can always find these little gems of inspiration from it so that it never feels like, there's a lack of inspiration out there. I'll definitely say that I'm never bored because I always have something to look at. I always have a book to pick up. I always have a movie to watch. I always have, a walk to take. So in and of itself, I think looking at like these little mundane things that maybe we overlook at times is what really, really keeps me balanced through everything. So being a fan and just making sure that you absorb the inspiration that's around you without having the blinders on too much, I think is a really good way to approach that.
That's amazing. Next question. Eric, why are you a creative, or why are you a creative?
You know what? It's like, I've always, I think it's just being a sponge. It's like this, like a human sponge of just like absorbing everything that was around me, like whether it be collecting comic books or playing video games, or again, going back to skateboarding or being obsessed with the NBA, or, again, rifling through these photo albums. I think I'm probably like, there's not too many creative people in my family in terms of like outright creativity. I think hustle is also creativity. So in terms of hustle, I have the most creative family ever. But I think it's just trying to reflect on it. Again, going back to the inspiration, it was just trying to reflect the things that I was really, really inspired by. And that gave me the inspiration to, take a leap of faith and feel like I could have something to, I guess, add to the creative conversation of everything that I was inspired by. So in and of itself, I think creativity was almost also what saved my life in a lot of ways without going down, a path that maybe might have not been conducive to making the best life for myself. But creativity was always something that kept me in check. So I guess being obsessed with creativity made me a creative, if that makes sense. And it still does till this day, So I really love it. And it's a dream come true to be able to wake up every day and do what we love. And also, put our ideas out there and have it be received in a manner that really inspires us to keep doing more.
Absolutely. It's definitely, it's a wild journey for sure, but definitely a wonderful, wonderful journey.
Totally.
Next question. How do you deal with rejection and how do you stop it from affecting your creative process? It's a great question.
You know what? It's like, you need the L's. You need the L's in order to understand that you got to fix things, or like, you have to rejig something. It's like, it's very rare for an NBA team to win 82 games out of the year. You know what I'm saying? Like if you can go 82-0, then you're going to be one of the greatest franchises ever. But you need to take these L's every now and then in order to sort of like just use it as a checkpoint to stepping back and asking why. And I think that that's what I'm most obsessed with as a person and as a creative, is just like, I'm trying to figure out my why. Like, why do I do these things? Like, I analyze everything, every decision, so that if I'm making mistakes or act some type of way, then I want to check myself before, it either happens again or it's going to happen again, but at least I check myself in the process, so that I'm at least giving myself the opportunity to, make sure that I'm at least, footnoting the mistakes, so that if they come up again, then at least I know how to handle it, or at least I know that I've talked to myself about that before. So I think dealing with rejection is a plus at the end of the day, in terms of how it is that you, I guess, receive it. And I think it's important not to take it too personal, because a lot of it is maybe based on one dimension of what makes you an individual, and maybe it's a specific thing that you're being rejected for. But I think using the rejection to make it a checkpoint for you to look at it and in a I want to say more observational way, so that you could maybe not be in the macro, but maybe jump out to like the bird's eye perspective and look at why it is. I think using the rejection as a checkpoint for yourself is really important. And just don't take it too personal, because I think that at the end of the day, the rejection is what allows you to understand whether you're doing things right or wrong. And not even wrong being, a subjective statement, I guess that you can adjust things every now and then based on certain forms of rejection.
That's a great take, especially because it happens, especially with startups and being an entrepreneur, rejections at some point, feels like it happens more than the actual W's,
Yeah.
So
and
learning from your L's.
Yeah. For sure. And you know how it is, in the creative space, whether you're working with clients and things of that nature, you can be sending iterations of, a project or an idea 10 times, and it's going to get shut down every time. But I think just being engaged in the conversation and knowing that it's a blessing to even be in a conversation like that, I think really, at least for me, takes a lot of the emotion out of it for me. I'm just here to hear constructive feedback and understand how I can get better, because that'll make me better in every endeavor, whether it's a client project or something that I'm trying to do for myself.
Absolutely. Next question. What are your favorite books, movies, sources for inspiration? Whew, this is loaded. I can already tell.
Damn, dude, we got another hour. So much. My favorite movie of all time is Lost in Translation by Sofia Coppola. I'm a huge Wes Anderson fan. I really love Quentin Tarantino. Michel Gondry, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is another one of my favorites. I really love watching a lot of documentaries, because I love learning about the past. In terms of that, trying to think of a documentary that I've watched recently. I think it was a studio. I'll come up to it. But books, a lot of photo books. Recently just acquired an amazing book by Irving Penn, amazing photographer that I'm super inspired by. I recently acquired the Bill Cunningham book, the famous street photographer from New York City, for the New York Times fashion section that unfortunately passed away a few years ago. So it's amazing seeing Bill Cunningham's street photography and street fashion work. I recently read the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood novel by Quentin Tarantino, and that was super dope, because I really love Quentin Tarantino in a lot of ways, because the universes that he creates for his films are so detailed, and it comes from so much resourcefulness of an era of film, or a certain time period that he's trying to put out there. So what was really cool about the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood book is that it basically was a companion to the film. So it gave you all the backstory to all the characters that were in the movie. So you learned about Cliff, who's his stunt double, and just his past, and just the fact that he was a war veteran. So highly recommended to check out the Quentin Tarantino book. And in terms of, I think, more thoughtfulness, I've really started to love Malcolm Gladwell, the author. So he has a ton of books out there. One of the recent ones that I've read is Malcolm Gladwell book called The Tipping Point. And it's the idea of creating epidemics. And it's a really amazing book for anybody that's out there in the creative space, I think, because what I really love about his books is that, epidemics obviously maybe have a health connotation to it, but what he's speaking about is epidemics of ideas. What makes ideas stick? What makes people take an idea and that start with word of mouth, and that becoming the hottest thing on the street. This idea of these different people in the world that act as sort of like vessels to get ideas out there and sort of spark this fire behind epidemics of ideas blew my mind, because I think that in the creative space, whether you're an entrepreneur or, you know, out there just in creativity in general, or advertiser or marketing, you know, making things stick is something that really, really kind of stood out to me. Like, what sticks, what makes that memorable, what makes people come back to it, what makes people obsess about it, what makes it culture. So can highly recommend anything Malcolm Gladwell these days. So he has a ton of books, so hopefully y'all can check him out if you haven't already.
I'm definitely gonna check out Tipping Point, because I have
Tipping
Blink,
Point's-
Outliers, and
I'm envious of your bookshelf setup you got there. That's super cool.
It takes a while to get through them, and he has also Talking to Strangers, which I've read too. He's incredible.
Yeah, really cool. And yeah, so I've only stumbled upon him. I actually stumbled upon him through his revisionist history podcast, and then I started reading his books. I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, I really like his writing style.
And he's Canadian too.
Yes, exactly. So shout out to Team Canada. Yeah, I think he frames everything in a manner where it's digestible for me. So I love short stories and like segmented sort of ideas, so that you can devour a chapter based around like a certain topic, and then kind of move on to like a real world, like, I guess, contextualization that he does for like the other parts of what he's trying to, I guess, impart through his writing. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Someone in the comments said, "Oh my God, that's honestly my favorite movie too, Lost in Translation."
Yes, right? Yo, it's that's the quietness, you know, like that's why I love that film. I mean, other than being obsessed with Japan for forever, what I love about Lost in Translation specifically is that it's a very quiet movie. And again, going back to how I operate as a photographer, you know, I think that life is quiet more than it is sort of loud. And for me, the characters in the film and just like the pace and the cinematography and, you know, I guess just like the storyline in and of itself, I think feels really real. And I think as a creative, as a director, as a photographer, as anybody who sort of like builds narratives, if you can capture that quiet tone of life through a photo or through a film, I think that that's a very special thing to have, because I think it's very, very quiet to like replicate the quietness of what we all experience when we have like these solitary moments that we're in more than not throughout the day. So shout out to Sofia Coppola and Scarlett Johansson and Bill Murray.
I'm definitely gonna have to check it out, because
by the way, you can go to the bar, by the way, like the Hyatt that they stay at. You can go to that bar and it's like still open, like a real hotel. Yeah. So apparently you can take like a Lost in Translation tour in Tokyo and like do all the spots. Yeah.
That's incredible. I love when they do that. I love when they have tours based on films, because my mom forced me to do the Sound of Music tour in Austria. And it was actually kind of cool.
That's definitely classic. I mean, shout outs to you know, my favorite things.
Absolutely. The next question: tell us about your process of going from idea to execution.
Yeah, amazing question. You know, I think the process obviously begins with inspiration and, you know, resourcing. I don't even want to say mood boarding or any of that, because it's definitely become like a super trendy term. But I think the process for ideation always comes from inspiration for me. So I gather all the inspiration based around whether there's a certain campaign or a certain photo that I want to take, or there's a certain theme that I'm going to be approaching. I do my deep dive in terms of just like gathering all the inspiration that I think is relevant towards the project that I'm trying to create. From there, I'll usually go through about, you know, a couple of ideations, and this is probably more specific to like client work, where we sort of like take the inspiration, build like a baseline narrative or like a pilot based around like an idea on the theme that we're sort of being inspired by. From there, it probably goes through a couple rounds of like tinkering with it so that we understand how to like really retrofit it for a certain campaign or a certain sort of like narrative that is specifically being built for the idea that we're sort of alchemizing. So from there, I think after we do a couple of ideations, then it really just gets passed around to our team so that we can get the feedback and understand that, hey, this works, that doesn't work. I think this could be stronger. Let's really focus on this. And then from there, that allows for us to sort of like, I want to say like trim the fat a little bit so that we can distill down the idea to like its most purest form so that it speaks directly to what the concept or mission is at hand. And then from there, I think that the process in and of itself sort of starts taking shape once you either, and this is like whether it's client work or personal work, like if I'm trying to set up a photo or I'm doing a photo shoot with somebody and I have a theme or an editorial that I want to create, then in and of itself, you kind of take all the inspiration, get feedback from it, and then go execute it. But also knowing that the first execution probably might not be the last one. So I love sort of, if I have the capacity to go out and almost shoot like a test concept so that I can almost pilot it before I actually go do the actual, full-on mission at hand, then that really helps me to sort of, again, just find the pace properly for all the projects that it is that I put out there as a photographer or as a creative director. And then be ready to present like a polished piece to either the client that I'm working with or putting out my sort of like best foot forward for a certain campaign that I'll be doing as a photographer as well.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks for the question.
I think we have one more question.
Okay.
We do have a last call for questions. So if anyone has anything else they want to leave in the chat, go right ahead. But our possibly tentatively last question is from Theodore. And Theodore mentioned he's from Montreal. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Piggybacking off the question above, how does your process differ when curating for the mag or radio or for a bigger project like a gallery space?
Amazing question as well. It's in a weird way, it doesn't differ too much in a lot of ways. I think the process still remains the same. Like first step, gathering inspiration. Second step, sort of like putting a base level idea out there, getting the feedback onto it, piloting it, and then sort of then ending up on end product or whatever it's going to be like put onto the walls, for example. So I think maybe there's just a couple of nuances here for example, like for the mag, I think the process always begins for us in terms of like the theme or the city that it is that we want to represent for the edition that we're putting out of the magazine. So in and of itself, like that's sort of like I want to call it like a 3-step process where we define the we define the city that we sort of want to put our spotlight on. The second space is sort of thinking about different themes or certain like styles of photography that we could put into the magazine. And then from there, we go source against that. So we're looking for a fashion photographer. We want a street photographer. We want somebody that's like super conceptual. Then based around like these sort of like, I want to say roles that we're trying to fill for the magazine, then we start sourcing people in those cities or different, places to fill in these roles. And then again, always using that aspect of having 3 males and 3 females as the main features for the magazine, sort of for the first wave. Same thing for radio, I want to say, where I think a lot of it just comes down to curation, like exactly what you said, the curation aspect has like a lot of similarities through the process. So even for the radio, it was just like trying to find, DJs that had different taste levels in their music so that when we look at the themes that we want to cover, then we're covering all our bases, like from an electronic radio show to more of like a funk, sort of like, soul kind of show to more of like, I want to call it like house and drum and bass and like a little bit heavier on that. And so I think it's all about balance in that sense. And then when it comes to sort of like taking all these ideas and whether curating a gallery event for the magazine or doing like a radio showcase, like, at a party, I think it's just all about creating these waves of emotion, like creating these different sort of waves where if we put a gallery together, for example, or a magazine, or a showcase for our radio, we don't want too much of the same stuff overlapping with one another. So if we're doing a gallery event and we have a fashion photographer next to a street photographer, then that's an amazing juxtaposition for us because it's not crossing over in and of itself. So it becomes complementary in a lot of ways in that sense. So the same thing for a layout on the magazine. We don't want to have people that are too similar in style, like following each other from one feature to the next. And then when it comes down to like a radio show, for example, we definitely don't want to have like, 2 house DJs back to back because we want to be able to like break the monotony of, maybe listening to too much of the same sound at all times. So I think it's just all about creating like these emotional levels of going from high to low and almost like creating like these wavelengths through the project so that you're giving people just enough to, peak, but also, come down a little bit and then come back up with you. So I think that is the wave that we try to take from all of our projects, from the magazine to the radio to the gallery curation. I think it's just all about like an emotional narrative that happens through the experience in and of itself.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. I think that was a wonderful question to end off of. I think that was a great answer.
Thank you for all the questions.
Yeah, thanks everyone for all the questions. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Eric, for your time. I'm sure that everyone has taken a lot out of this conversation. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening to us chat as well. Make sure you follow Eric and Street Dreams to stay on top of his and all their projects. And make sure you follow Parsons Entrepreneur to stay on top of our future events. We have some amazing creatives coming up, just like Eric. So you definitely don't want to miss out on that. But yeah, thank you, Eric. I will speak to you very soon. Thank you, everyone,
Yes.
again for joining.
Thank
And
you
I
so
hope you
much.
have a wonderful rest of your week.
Yes. Big love to everybody. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Bye, everyone.
See you later.